everybody. It's 6:30, and so we're going to start. I'm Elizabeth Weilbacher. I'm the head of adult services at the Goffstown Public Library, and we are delighted to have you all here.
Thank you.
I'm not going to go into any long introduction of Tony Tremblay, the man who you all know, who's just written this book.
Thank you very much. Between the allergies and everything else that's going on, my throat's a little raw. So if you can't hear me, just yell and I'll speak louder. Okay back there? Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Goffstown Public Library, for having me here. It really is an honor. The Goffstown Library really does support its community and it supports its authors. So I can't thank them enough for inviting me here. Before I start, I do want to pick out a few people in the audience that I'm very grateful for showing up, for coming. First guy, right here, he's a celebrity. And his name is Christopher Golden, and he's the New York Times best-selling author of Ararat. And he has a new book out, Road of Bones, is climbing the charts. It's a huge book, and you may see movies of some of his books soon. Chris is...
Tony, we're here to talk about your book.
Chris has been a mentor, he's been a friend, just an invaluable guy to have around, and I really love the guy and I appreciate him being here. The other guy right behind him is John McElveen. You couldn't ask for a better friend. He is my publisher, and I'm going to talk a little bit about both of these guys in a little bit once I get going. But if it wasn't for Mac, I wouldn't be here right now. So I owe Mac an awful lot. And he says, "No, you don't owe me anything," but I do. I owe Mac an awful lot. And thank you for coming. There's a few people here from my writers group. Sandy and Robert. Robert's out back. Sandy's out front here. I want to thank them for coming. They've been invaluable as far as support and motivation goes. And I'll talk a little bit about them also. I'm going to start telling you just a little bit about me, and then I'll get into the books and how I've written them or what's behind them. I was born in Manchester, which is the next town over. It's about a 10, 15-minute ride from here. And I moved to Goffstown 45 years ago. I guess that still doesn't make me a townie, but it gets close. For 10 of those years, I worked in Manchester at a company called Gold Bond Building Products. And Gold Bond made vinyl siding for all over the world, all over the United States and Canada. And when I worked at Gold Bond, the first 5 years they were terrible, absolutely bad. We lost a lot of money. A couple of guys went to jail. I was the only person that was left in the management. They let everybody else go and they kept me. And for the next 5 years, we did great. And it's not because of me, it's because of the support we had. But we did really good. In fact, we did so good, the company that owned us said, "Hey, we're going to move you down south because electricity is cheaper, labor is cheaper. We're going to make a lot more money." Now, I'm a New England boy. There's no way I'm going down south, and I didn't go. I went somewhere else. But just to let you know what happened, they moved to a place in Mississippi, and they closed the plant 2 years later. So you get what you pay for, and it's unfortunate for the people that did move down there, but that's the way it is. So I was the production manager when I was at Gold Bond, and then I went to a company called New England Plastics, and they're in Woburn, Mass. Woburn, Mass. If you're from around here, you say you really went to Woburn, Mass every day, and I did. It's a 90-minute commute. So every day for 35 years, I traveled 3 hours a day to go to work.
I gotta ask, what did you listen to on the radio on the rides there?
I listen to a lot of Neil Young. I'm a huge Neil Young fan. But all the regular things that people listen to. And then finally I got Sirius Radio, and then I got everything. And I was a news junkie, and I listened to news. I listened to a lot of things. But I worked there for 35 years, and I was the vice president of manufacturing. When you're a vice president of a small company, it means you wear a lot of different hats. I did sales, I did marketing, I was HR, did the hiring, and I was in charge of the plant. I did it all. And I did that for 35 years until I retired 3 years ago. people say, hey, do you miss anything about work? And I really liked the job. I loved it a lot. But what I didn't miss was that commute. I can't, to this day, I think about traveling all that distance back and forth every day, and my neck stiffens and my back hurts. It's not much fun. I saw a lot of bad things happen. I was in one accident. I was okay, but I was in one accident during those 35 years. But I saw a lot of really bad ones. And I'm glad it's over, and I'm glad it's done. So while I was at Gold Bond, while I was at Wingland Plastics, I really didn't do much writing. I didn't do any fiction writing at all. But I wanted to. I always wanted to since I was a kid. I think when, I was about 10 years old, I wrote a horror story called Spiders Ate My Face. And I showed it to my dad, who promptly cut it to pieces. And that stifled my writing career for a long time. But I always wanted to. I always wanted to write. And about 10 years ago, a coworker said to me, hey, the Goffstown Library has a writers group. I said, really? She said, I know you like to write, and if you saw my inter-office memos, they're always an interesting story. There's always a lot of fun to those. And she said, I know you like to write, you ought to go and take a look. So I did. And I tell you, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. The group was fantastic. It was a small group. There was about 8 to 10 people. But more importantly, they were a critique group. A critique group is when you send your submissions in, they go over it, word by word, line by line, sentence by sentence, and they cut the crap out of it. I mean, they really tear that thing up. And there's a reason for that. It's to make you a better author. And I'll tell you, my first couple of submissions, they cut those up. I mean, they were bad. But again, I learned from those. So I kept at it and kept at it. And finally, I came up with the story that I thought was pretty good, and they did too, and it was called An Alabama Christmas. So at the time, I was a member of a website called Horror World. And there's a lot of horror fans and a lot of horror authors on Horror World. And they said, I said to them, hey, I wrote this great story, Alabama Christmas, and I'm hoping somebody will publish it somewhere. And there's a guy in, of all places, Australia, emails me and says, do you mind if I read that story? And I said, sure. So I sent him the story. He emails me back a couple of days later, says, I love it. The story is fantastic. I'm making an anthology. I'd really like to put it in there. And I'm like, sure. My first story, I couldn't believe it. So he says, I'll get back to you. So I waited, and I waited. About 3 months go by, and I finally got the nerve up to say, hey, that story that you said you were going to publish? He goes, I've been meaning to talk to you. He goes, a very famous horror writer, very well respected, sent in a novella. Well, we're going to take it because of who it is. And I had to let somebody out of the anthology. And you're the new guy. We had to pick somebody near it. So I was devastated. And I know somebody's asking, who was the guy? Who's the guy? It was Tom Piccirilli. And there's no way I can complain that somebody took a Tom Piccirilli novella over my short story. But I went on, back on Horror World, and I said, geez, my story didn't get published. And the owner of the website, Nancy Calanta, said, hey, can I read the story? And I said, sure. And I sent it to her. And she loves it. She came back and said, I'm going to publish this story for you. I said, that's fantastic. And she says, I'm also going to pay you for it. And I said, oh. I said, how much? $250. Now I'm like, $250 for a story? I'm going to make tons of money. I'm going to keep writing stories, and I'm going to get all this money. I have it, I get this down. So I kept writing stories, and I wrote a bunch of stories. And I wrote one called The Old Man that I really liked. Keeps nodding his head because they were good stories. I wrote The Old Man, and I sent it out, and it got rejected a couple places. So I was kind of dejected, and I went to a conference called NECON, which is a convention was in Rhode Island. Now it's in Massachusetts, where a lot of horror authors and fans went to. It's more fans than authors, actually, but it's a lot of fun. It's a good place to go. And I met a woman there, and we got to talking, and she said, do you write? And I said, yeah. And she said, do you have anything? And I said, well, I have this story called The Old Man that's been rejected twice. It's not really horror, it's a crime story. And she goes, let me read it. And she read it, and she came back and said, you know, I'm publishing this book called Epitaphs. I want to publish The Old Man and Epitaphs. I'm thinking, this is fantastic, you know, my second story. I said, great. She says, and I'm going to pay you for it. And I went, oh, wow. She goes, $25. And I'm there, okay, $250, $25. Of course I said yes. I mean, I wanted the story published. But, you know, I learned something from that. New writers don't make a lot of money. And actually $25, $50 back then was about the average that new writers got paid for stories. It didn't stop me. I just kept writing and writing. I kept submitting stories to the writers group, and they would help me, and I'd write some on my own. Well, eventually I got, I think it was about 20 stories published. Some were overseas, some were in anthologies, some were on websites. I thought I had enough for a collection, so I called a friend of ours, the two friends actually, the Davids from Crossroad Press. I think they're in North Carolina. And I said, hey, I got all these stories, would you mind putting them together for a collection? And they said, sure, you know, let's send it down, let's take a look at it. And they did, and they loved the stories. So the stories came out in a book called The Seeds of Nightmares. I know you guys can't see it back there, but The Seeds of Nightmares. Funny thing happened when that came out. It did very well. It shocked the heck out of me. The Seeds of Nightmares, when it came out, was in the top 10 anthology books in horror the day it was released. Yeah, and I think that's because I think I knew enough people online, I had enough friends that they bought it, and they started talking about it beforehand, and then the reviews started coming in, and the reviews were great. I was just tickled pink. People were buying this anthology. It was doing very, very well. So I thought, you know, it's kind of nice to have these checks coming in. I think I'm going to keep writing short stories. So then, one day out of the blue, a man by the name of Christopher Golden reaches out to me and says, hey, me and a guy by the name of Jim Moore, who's a well-respected and very popular horror author, are putting together a class. And it's a seminar on how to write better fiction. He said, Tony, you know, I think you might get something out of this class. Would you like to join it? I said, absolutely. You know, who doesn't want to learn how to write better? So I said, okay, and I signed up for it. So about 3 weeks before the first class, there was a book reading. It was somewhere in Massachusetts by a man named Bracken McLeod, who's another, I consider him a famous author, but a very well-respected author. And I met Jim, Chris's partner, at the book signing, and Jim said, hey, Tony, let's go to lunch. This guy's my hero, right? Okay. So I went to lunch with Jim. So we're sitting there, and he looks at me, and he goes, for the class, can you tell me what kind of horror novel you're writing? And I went, excuse me? And he said, horror novel, what's the class? You know, write better fiction. And I said, I thought it was short stories. He goes, no, it's novels. And it's my fault. I didn't look at the fine print. I just signed up and decided to go. So now I'm like, oh, Jim, I don't know what to do. I said, I've never written a novel. I don't know how to write a novel. I don't have any ideas for a novel. And he looked at me the way Jim looks at people, and he said, Tony, what did you always want to write about and never have? I said, haunted house. Came to me real quickly. And he said, he pointed to me. He actually went, that's the novel you're going to write. And if you know Jim, you just listen to whatever he says. So I said, okay. So I went to the reading got done, and I ran home, and I started work on a novel. In the opening, the novel, I had it done in about 3 weeks, not the novel, but the submission. And it became the opening to the Morehouse. It was the first chapter in the Morehouse. So I went to the class, and I submitted it to Jim and to Chris and all the members of our little group. And Chris thought it was just okay. A lot of redlining, like he always does, but a lot of redlining.
It was my first meeting, too.
Jim had some suggestions that...
the class was called How to Write Better.
Yeah, and I needed to write better. When it was done, I was like very, depressed. I said, man, I'm never going to be able to write a letter. What I wrote was junk. But a funny thing happened. All the members of the group, when these guys weren't around, came up to me and they said, that was fantastic. That was really good. You got to keep on this. And they gave me the motivation. I mean, that was enough motivation from these guys, but they gave me the real motivation to keep going. And I said, okay. In fact, Mike's back there. He was one of those guys that came up to me. In fact, he was the first guy that came up to me. So I'll forever thank you for that. But they came up to me and they said, you got to do it. So I went back home and I continued to work on it. And it took me a year to write it, but I did. I wrote The Morehouse. So The Morehouse is done. I'm still writing some short stories. I get on Facebook and I said, hey, I just wrote this novel called The Morehouse. I haven't sent it anywhere yet, but I'm really proud of it. I really like it. And John McElveen, a friend of mine, just started his press back up. It's called Haverhill House Press. And I mean, John's been around for a long time. He's published some of the greats in horror, a lot of Chris's stuff he publishes. And he said, do you mind if I look at it? And I said, gosh, no, I'll be more than happy. So I sent John the manuscript. So I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I don't hear anything. And I'm thinking, this is another Alabama Christmas. Then one day, I'm reading Facebook, and there's this post from John. It's about Haverhill House, his publishing company. He says, oh, we're doing great, we're having fun, we got all these new books coming out, and we'd like to welcome new author Tony Tremblay in his book, The Morehouse. That's how I found out I was accepted. And I'm like, what? And they're, what? And I was just like jumping for joy, because that's how he told me. So the Morehouse gets published. And a funny thing happened. The Morehouse did very well. The day it was released, it was number 2 on the horror charts on Amazon. Now you go, number 2? How can you can't complain about that, but I can. And the reason is, number 1 and number 3 were by some guy named Stephen King. But it wasn't the Stephen King. There was this guy with the same name. He wrote some really bad horror novels. People didn't know. They just saw Stephen King and a title and they bought it. And they bought these things like crazy. And I was number 2 because a fake Stephen King knocked me out of number 1. So I was really burned up about it. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, there's nothing you can do. And I don't know what happened to that guy, if he's still around.
He's under your porch, right?
He's now publishing as fake Tony Tremblay.
Fake Tony Tremblay. Doing very well too, I hear. So I'm like, oh my God. But I was super happy. The reviews came in. The reviews were all positive. They were great. It gets great review from Chris, and I was just super happy. It was doing well. And then it got nominated for a Bram Stoker Award. Bram Stoker Award is like the Oscars for the horror industry. They pick 5 books in a category, and then they let the readers and the judges that they choose pick the best of those 5. In fact, Chris just won one for Ararat. It's a very high honor, and congratulations again. Yes, that's a real good honor.
Is that the real Chris Gordon who wrote that?
Yeah.
No, I definitely used that other guy.
Yeah, he's under your porch, John. So I get nominated. So I'm super happy and pleased. So I flew down to Michigan for the ceremonies, and I'm waiting. I get to my category, and they announced the winner, and it wasn't me. I was sad. Everybody wants to win, and didn't mean I was going to stop writing or anything, but it was nice to have been to won. But something good came out of it. I got to write down Oscar nominated. I got to write down Stoker nominated author of The Morehouse. So it went on The Morehouse. It went on Do Not Weep for Me, and it went on some other books. So once The Morehouse is out and it's doing very well, and it's still doing well, it still sells quite a few copies. I started work on a new book, and people were saying, hey, you should do something about a sequel to the Morehouse. I didn't really want to do a sequel. I wanted to do something kind of different. But I liked a lot of the characters that were in the Morehouse. So what I did is I wrote a book called Do Not Weep for Me that had the pawn shop owner and Father Bracken McLeod, as well as a lot of new characters. And the new characters are really driving the plot in the book. So then I'll just briefly go over what the book's about, because I want to read a little bit from it later, and that might help you understand something from it. The book, the main, there's a lot of different threads, but the main thread is this guy named Paul. He's got this little girl named Cindy, and every day he takes her to work. His wife died, so he takes her to daycare while he goes to work. So one morning, he says, "You ready to go to daycare?" And she says, "Can I go out in the swings out back first?" And he goes, "Well, okay, I'll get the stuff in the car. You go on the swing set and I'll come get you." So he goes to the car, he puts all his stuff in there. And as he's walking around the house to get to the back, he stops. There's something wrong. And he realizes what it is. He can't hear the squeaks of the chains on the swing set. He never oiled them. So you could hear it from all over the place, half the neighborhood. So now he's starting to panic. Oh my God, he says, please don't make me messed up. Please don't make me have messed up. He runs to the other side of the house, looks, and Cindy's gone. And that starts a whole chain of events. Just a little spoiler, while he's waiting out front while the police are looking for Cindy, a woman comes up, an African-American woman. She says, "My daughter was also taken. Do you mind if I sit and wait with you while the police do something, just in case they have any clues for me?" And Paul says, yeah. They sit and they wait together, and a relationship is formed. The spoiler is, they do find the two kids, but they've changed, and they brought something back with them. That's all I can tell you right now. But it's not what you expect. There's some really significant twists in there. And I'm going to read a little later on, just a small portion to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So, Do Not Weep for Me goes to the publisher. It goes to John. Something terrible happened. John's house caught on fire. Badly. He was kicked out of his house for a year.
Yeah, it was almost 2 years before we could move back in.
Almost 2 years. A terrible fire. In fact, I remember it like it was yesterday. Chris calls, "John's house is on fire," and he was shaking. I was shaking.
They were at my house before it would finish burning.
We ran down to help him. I mean, we were just so nervous, so scared for John. But his house burnt down. So what that means is, Do Not Weep for Me is delayed, and I can understand that. I mean, anybody would. You say, "Hey, look, he's not only a friend, but even if he wasn't a friend, he's in trouble. So you got to support him." So now I'm waiting for John to get his business back together and say, I really want to get another book out there. So I collected 20 more stories that I wrote, and I called up the Davids at Crossroad Press. They did the first book. And I said, "You guys interested in another collection?" And they said, "Love it, love to." So I sent them the stories, and they released my second volume of collections, Blue Stars and Other Tales of Darkness. Blue Stars came out, and the day it was released, it was a top 10 in horror anthologies for a day. And after that, sales started to go down. It did not do as well as The Seeds of Nightmares. I don't know why. I was a little disappointed. I mean, people enjoyed it, but the reviews weren't there. It just didn't have the buzz that The Seeds of Nightmares had. And there were some excellent stories in there, so I'm not sure what happened. I have two theories, and both of them may be way out of whack. But the first thing I think is, the first story, called Steel, is a novella. It's a long, long story. So when you open the book, you got this long story to read. And it's science fiction. It's not really horror. So I think people that read the Morehouse, that read the first collection, got to Steel and said, this ain't horror. So it didn't get the word of mouth that the other books did. Secondly, look at this cover. It's very dark. If you're on a phone, if you're on a tablet, and you're looking at books, and this comes up, you're going to give it a second look? Probably not. A book's cover is so important. You just look at it and you go, oh man, I want this. Or even if you don't want it, if it attracts you, that's what you want as a publisher, the reader to at least look at it. And this didn't, I don't think, did that. And it's my fault. I approved it. I let it go. Blue Stars did okay. I mean, it didn't do as good as the Seeds of Nightmares. I still get checks on the Seeds of Nightmares, but the ones for Blue Stars are very small. But that's okay. I mean, that's the way it goes. And hopefully my next collection will do even better. So now I'm waiting for John he's getting close. He's telling me that, hey, do not wait for me, should be out in about another 8 months. So now, okay. And I'm at Nikon again, a different Nikon. The same convention, but a different year. And I'm sitting with a gentleman by the name of Charles Rutledge. And we got to talking a little bit. We got to be friends. And later on Facebook, Charles and I were talking about these wooden trains I make. I make terror trains, horror trains. And they got Dracula, skeletons, gnomes, whatever. And they're all black, and there's a caboose and an engine and a middle part. And Charles said, boy, I really like scary train stories. I wish there was an anthology of scary train stories. And I said, yeah, me too. I've never seen one. And he says, well, if there was one, I'd write a story for it. And I said, you know what? I'd write a story for one too. So we get to talking back and forth. Then I made a mention of, I said, you know what? This all sounds really good, but without a publisher, we're not going to get anywhere with it. Funny thing happened. John McElveen saw the post. And John gets on and he says, I will publish that for you. But I'm still rebuilding. If you do all the work, also all I have to do is submit it and get it printed, I'll publish it for you. So we talked and said, yeah, we can do that. We needed another editor. You always should have an odd number of editors, and Scott Goswell's very odd. So Scott came on board. So the three of us put together Fright Train. And by doing all the work, that means we contacted all the authors, paid all the authors, did the cover art, paid for the cover art, and did all the editing ourselves. So handed that to John. John published it. Freight Train came out. I believe it was number 18 on the day it came out in the horror anthology charts. So it didn't get in the top 10. But it didn't stay there that long either. Freight Train has done all right. We kind of knew it would be a niche thing because not everybody likes trains.
Anthologies are a hard sell anyways.
I'm sorry?
Anthologies are a hard sell.
And that's the other thing. There's so many anthologies out there. There's every kind you can name. But ours did well, and it broke even. It just about broke even. And there's still time to go, but if you're ever looking for an anthology and you like trains, Freight Train is great. I mean, there's some unbelievable authors in this. Some of the best, classic authors. Chris Golden's in it. In fact, Chris's story's so good, it's the anchor for the anthology. It's that good. Scott's got one in there. I've got one in there. It's a great book of stories. I think you'd really enjoy it, whether you like trains or not. It's very good. So now, about 6, 7 months go by, and Do Not Weep for Me comes out. When it was released, I looked at the charts, and it was in the top 100 of all Amazon books, not just horror, but all Amazon books when it was released. And I was stunned. I was just like, this is crazy. Now, it didn't last long, but it got to that point. And I want to say it was like 57 or something. I can't remember the exact number. But it did very well on that first day. It's still going. It's still too new to tell you how it's going to turn out. But there are a lot of copies sold. Reviews are coming in. I'm happy with it. I think John's happy with it. And I'm praying that Chris Golden's blurb on the front sells even more copies. And I love the blurb. He wrote, Tony Tremblay writes the kind of horror I grew up on, full of ghosts, sex, demons, and unrelenting evil. He's having as much fun as his readers, and it shows. And I thought that was a great blurb. The biggest difference between Do Not Weep for Me and the aforementioned The Morehouse is that the follow-up has a lot more adult content. So
A lot easier to edit it.
and I was a little nervous about that. I said, "Oh, geez, are people gonna have a problem with all that?" I keep calling it adult content because this is being recorded for television, and I'm not sure the three-letter word would go over too well. So I'll just say adult content. But I was a little nervous about it. I said, "Oh, geez." But everybody I've heard from says, "No, it's not. It's not too much." The adult content is not gratuitous. It's important to the plot. So there's a reason for it being there. And I was at I was a private group that I was speaking to about 3 weeks ago. And I was comparing the two novels. And I mentioned that the new one had adult content. All their eyes lit up. They smiled. And when it came time at the end when I sold books, guess which book sold the most? So I think I was worried for nothing. I'm going to read to you just a very small portion of Do Not Weep for Me. It's only 3 pages, 2.5 pages.
Read the adult content.
No.
That's the other 222 pages.
It's all the other pages except for these 3. And I explained, I gave you a little heads up on what I was going to talk, what this is about earlier when I explained one of the themes, and I'm just going to read to you what I told you. Paul Lane glanced at the thermometer on his front porch, 74 degrees, and then, cup of coffee in hand, stood on concrete steps. He noticed the thick cloud cover. Its gray hue muted the sunshine, dulling the vibrant palette of the season. He looked down and frowned. The grass covering his yard looked different. The stiff, neatly trimmed blades rested limply on the topsoil. The deep shamrock green had faded, its tips tinged with yellow. He was too tired looking for mid-June. The neighborhood had taken on a dingy appearance. It was as if the brick, aluminum, and vinyl siding facades on the homes had bathed in a layer of dust. Not one of the new cars screamed, "Look at me!" Their wax jobs lacked sparkle. Their chrome trims dull. Excuse me. Something was off. People in this neighborhood had pride. They were not known for neglecting their property. "Daddy?" The call broke his concentration. "Yes, Cindy." "Can I play on the swing for a few minutes before you take me to school?" Paul didn't answer. There was a heaviness to the area he couldn't put his finger on. The atmosphere had weight. Not only was it oppressive, it was concerning in a way that defied easy description. He caught sight of Sheila White, the neighbor across the street, as she retrieved the daily newspaper from the box at the end of her driveway. The woman waved to him, and he waved back. She was a fine-looking woman, and she knew it. He smiled when she stopped a few feet from her front door and wiggled her ass before stepping back inside. Paul's wife had been dead for 4 years now, but that didn't mean he was. Though Sheila often flirted with him, she was off limits. He and her husband Tom were still good friends, and he would never betray that trust. Still, she did brighten Paul's mood on occasion. "Daddy, can I?" "Huh?" He had forgotten about Cindy. "Yeah, sure, honey. Stay in the back. I'll come get you when it's time to leave. You want to eat anything before you have a breakfast? Before you go to daycare and have breakfast?" "No, I'm okay. Can you push me?" He chuckled. "Sure. Give me a minute to bring my stuff to the car. I'll be right out." "Thanks, Daddy." She gave him a quick hug and ran back inside. He followed her in, and after chugging his coffee, Paul draped a suit coat over his arm and grabbed his briefcase and backpack. There was a thud, confirming his daughter had gone through the back door to get to the swing set. The forecast promised clear weather, so he left his car in the driveway overnight. He walked to the Lexus with thoughts of that morning's meeting he had planned with his company's engineers. He made a mental note to review the cost analysis of the retrofit on the South Willow Street strip mall in Manchester. Lost in thought, he threw his suit coat and briefcase onto the rear seat. After shutting the door, he made an effort to clear his head and attend to Cindy. He walked past an area of tall pines and scrub that marked the property line on the right side of his house. When he was about to turn the corner to the backyard, he slowed. This doesn't feel right. He should have heard squeaks from the rusty trains attached to the joints at the top of the swing set. He meant to oil them, but he had never found the time. The squeaks were annoying, loud. You could hear them from 20 feet away. His back stiffened and he hurried his pace. She could be sitting and not swinging. Maybe she went back into the house. God, please, don't let me have messed up. He rounded the corner. The swing was empty. Cindy was nowhere in sight. And then it gets really bad. Thank you very much, everybody. I think I've taken up enough of your time, but I do really appreciate you all coming. If you want to ask me some questions, now's the time to do it.
How do you manage the negative reviews with social media and everything?
I cry. I don't take them well.
Even though you must know that a lot of people just do it to troll. Right?
Yeah, I do, and you can tell the trolls sometimes depending on what they write. I do have a hard time with negative reviews. I guess it's my personality. I take it to heart. On the Morehouse, one person wrote this review on Goodreads. I never read Goodreads because it's just terrible stuff that people write. But I went on to see what people were saying.
It's like Yelp.
Yeah.
For books.
What's that?
It's like Yelp, but for books.
But for books. And this woman wrote, "Oh my God, a house that eats people. No way I'm reading this." And I'm like, she missed the whole point of the story in the first place. But
Did she even read it?
No. No.
Why are you putting a review
No,
up?
no. And it was, and she gave it 1 star, and it brings all the other reviews down. But it's still, the book still had a 4.8 out of 5, so I can't complain. But I don't take them well. I mean, I never reply. You should never reply to a bad review.
I just wondered because it's such personal work.
Yeah.
And I wanted to tell you that I grabbed Seeds of Nightmare downstairs because it was just in my face, and I read mostly horror, and I had nightmares every single night that I read that book. It was last summer.
It's not the photo, right?
It had nothing to do with the cover. It had to do with the stories. Every single night. It took me
So it
like
did its job.
4 nights to read it, and I had a nightmare. I personally like having nightmares, but like every single night that I read it, I had a nightmare.
Well, as Sandy said, it did its job. That's great. Yes. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah,
That's a good review.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's quite a compliment.
Yes,
Well,
it is.
I did it during the adult program here at the library, so I did do
Oh,
a
wow.
review on it. So
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. I didn't know it was part of the adult program here. Thank you.
well, no, I mean like you had to read like a bunch of books.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't read anything else.
But horror,
or crime.
Okay. Do you know there's a new horror book called Do Not Wait for Me?
I like the pawn shop owner in the Morehouse, so.
Oh, you did?
Excited, yeah.
Well, he's got a much bigger role in this one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
We're your spokesmodels.
I guess so, yeah.
I have to take my shirt off?
Go ahead.
God, no.
So, this is a serious question, even though you're going to wince at the opening of it, which is that, you have earned a reputation as one of the nicest guys in the horror community. And I know you hate when we say, Tony Tremblay is the nicest guy in horror. But it is such an interesting dichotomy that the horror community has a reputation for being kind.
Super nice people.
Yes.
And so it's interesting that you have a reputation for being so nice, and your work is so dark that it gave this poor woman nightmares every night. Just in general, like, you know, where do you, I don't want to say where do you get your ideas, but like, how do you sort of rationalize that dichotomy between daily life of horror writers and then all the nightmares?
Well, it's even, you go further than that. My wife is a born-again Christian, so I live with that every day. And I write, while she's listening to the Bible, I'm over there writing about the devil, you know. When I was a kid, I read the Old Testament, and that scared the crap out of me. And I loved being scared. And the more violent, you know, the more gory and horrific the stories were, the more I enjoyed them. And I was just a young kid. And that feeling I got when I read them never left. Now, I never took these seriously, and like you, when you write books, you don't expect people to, you know, do what's in your books. I mean, they're not, you know, meant for that. They're meant for release, you know, not to copy and not to mimic. So when I write these things, I'm in a good place usually. I'm just trying to get back to where I was when I was a kid, and when I got scared. And I'm thinking, what scared me then still scares me now. And so that's what I write. And if you write a scene and you get so excited about it, I know you do, you just feel good. You know, you just feel good. And I don't know if that's answered your question or not, but that's what I do. That's how I feel.
I mean, there's not a house in Goffstown that eats people.
There is. She asked if there's a house in Goffstown that eats people. There is, and
That's where Stephen King went.
Just don't let him invite you over.
yeah, I was gonna say I'll talk to you later where it is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you said you wrote some sci-fi. Do you like horror better than sci-fi, or
I
is
do.
it toss up?
Yeah, I don't understand sci-fi that well, and the story I wrote, Steel, is a sci-fi story with horrific elements. I mean, there's a lot of horror in Steel. The biggest problem I have with sci-fi is a lot of times I don't understand it. I'm just not a nerd. I can't grasp those. I'm sorry, I can't grasp those concepts. But the biggest problem I have with sci-fi are the names. If I need a protractor and a pencil paper, a piece of paper and pencil to write everybody's name down so I can remember them, or if I can't pronounce them, I just don't enjoy reading those kind of books. So I bypass them. And I know you can write sci-fi. He wrote Tin Man, which I consider a sci-fi book, which was thoroughly enjoyable.
I'm going to give you a check later, Tony.
Well, you showed up. So yeah, I mean, that's the problem I have with sci-fi. And there's a lot of, like, Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite authors. But he made it so you could read his stuff. You know, everybody could read his stuff. You didn't have to be a nerd. You didn't have to really be into science to understand it.
It's not hard sci-fi.
I'm sorry?
It's not hard sci-fi, it's human element.
Exactly. Yeah, Mike.
This is a little nuts and bolts about publishing anthologies, but you had mentioned you thought that maybe because Steel was the opening story, that book might not have sold as well as your first book of short stories. Who decides what order they go in, and what goes into those decisions?
Boy, I think it's different for everybody. I know in my case, I suggested which stories go first. I loved Steel. I thought it was a great story, so I suggested that it go first. And I take, like I said, I take the blame that the book came out as it did. Would have been better in the end, where, you know, all the scary stories came first and kind of worked your way up to the sci-fi story. I don't know. But yeah, every publisher's different. I don't know how other people do it.
How did you decide in Freight Train what order this? Like, is it like the way bands decide songs to go in order on their albums? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I would think you'd want to have some kind of.
Yeah, Scott can back me up on this, but it was committee. We went over every story, and we knew which stories we wanted to start and end. That was unanimous. We just said, you know, Chris's story has to anchor it, and Bracken McLeod's story has to start it. We knew that, and then we had to decide what order the other stories go. When you have your own story in an anthology that you're doing, it gets kind of messy because you know you want yours in the front, but you know you almost say, well, put mine in the middle just to be fair, and let somebody else go. But we had so many good stories; it was tough, and we would Scott, myself, and Charles would. We had quite a few discussions on what order to put them in, but we agreed. At the end we were all very satisfied with the way we chose them.
Tony, your writing practice, is there any time of day that you usually write, or is it when do you write?
When I feel like it. I mean, it could be, I usually get up, I have breakfast, I'll do something around the house, and then depending on what time I get up, it could be 9 o'clock, it could be 5:30 in the morning, it could be 6:30, it could be 7:30. I'm retired, I can do what I want, which is nice, but after I eat breakfast, I'll do an item, an odd job, something, just to wake up, to get the gears going. When I've done that, then I'll go to the computer and I'll sit down and I'll write. I'm the kind of guy that writes, I don't sit down and say I'm going to write 400 words today. I write whatever comes out. And I'm a slow writer because I constantly edit myself. After I've done a page, I go back and I redo that page. And sometimes I'll do that, I'll go over that page 4 or 5 times. So it's a real slow process. And all these experienced authors will tell you, don't do that. Keep writing. Just keep writing. I haven't been able to do that.
What about when you were working?
I'm sorry?
What about
Oh, that's a good question. When I was working, I did it. Brian Keene, who's a very famous author, has done a lot of good books, came on the Old Horror World website that I was telling you about. And he says, if you're working, you still have time to do something. You could do it during your breaks, you can do it during lunchtime, you can do it before you go to work, you can do it after you go to work. And I took that advice to heart. And at work during my breaks, I would write for 10, 15 minutes. During my lunch break, I would be writing while I was eating lunch. I come home at night, I do a little, and in the morning, sometimes before work, I would do a little.
It's not really about time, it's about priority.
Yeah, exactly. And, when I was working, work and family was priority.
Are you ever going to resurrect that story when spiders eat my face?
My father hated it so much, it just left a scar on me. There's no way.
I'm glad she said that because I thought the same thing when you mentioned it. I wonder what grown-up Tony would
write?
produce
Oh.
if you tried to do a novella. Publish it separately, because that title, I'd buy it just from the title alone. Spiders.
Spiders ate my father's face.
Yeah. Even better.
You could do an anthology of all your friends
Spiders.
writing a story
yeah.
about
But
spiders
spiders.
eating faces.
Well, now we know what you're going to write next.
It's funny, I'm working on something now. I'm not having a lot of luck with it. I've 3 or 4 times now I've written 4 or 5 chapters and I've rewritten them. I'm just having a hard time, so what I might do is put it aside. Another idea came to me that I like, and I'll probably start that. But I think I was talking to Chris, that what I might do is write 4 novellas, and then hopefully John will look at those novellas and say, yeah, that'll make a good book. And I've actually got a novella John's had for about 5 years now. And it's called What Does It Mean to Be a Woman? Now that title alone, I think, would make people very curious as to what the content is. So that novella is done. I've got another novella that's done.
Way to stick your neck out.
I know.
Yes.
Yeah,
I know.
definitely.
Yeah. Not just your neck, right?
Yeah.
It was written by them.
So I sent a novella to Jim Moore, so now I've got 2 novellas that I could possibly use, and that means I got to write 2 more. And I might do that, and then go back to the novel. But we'll see.
Spiders ate my face.
Spiders ate my face. Yeah.
So, Blue Stars, do you ever consider republishing it with a different cover?
Yeah, John has talked to me about combining the 2 into an omnibus, omnibus, including some other stories as well.
Yeah.
And I think
That's Tony so far.
And that might be something that we look at.
Because I know in the genre I write, or try to write, it is common. It's like covers change all the time. So
Yeah.
that cover didn't do it, boom, pop it out with a different cover.
Yeah.
And see if it gets whole.
Sandy writes romance, by the way. Yeah. Some speculative sci-fi romance too.
Yeah,
on top of that,
sci-fi.
yeah. Anybody else? No,
You mentioned earlier that you incorporate actual friends' names and such into your work. What kind of process is that? Do you get permission first? Do they get to review the work before it comes out? What's the whole process with incorporating those folks?
In the Morehouse, I asked every single person whose name I used for permission. And they all gave it. There's not one person that said no. In Do Not Weep for Me, I asked every person except one. And that one person was Christopher Golden. I didn't ask for his permission, I just put his name in there because I didn't think he would mind.
Wait till you see the letter from my attorney.
It was a good character, though.
So, and aside from Chris, has there been any negative feedback?
No, in fact, every character that I've used where I've gotten permission, the people have loved the character. And they've all been either killed off or,
I was so
they've...
disappointed I wasn't killed off.
No, that's right.
waiting.
Sandy has a major part in a few of my books. She's also in Do Not Weep for Me. But no, she hasn't been killed off. Robert Perot back there also features very prominently in a story called Blue Stars as Sandy. In fact, I wrote Blue Stars with those two people in mind. And Blue Stars did so well. It got a nomination for an Ellen Datlow recommended reading notice, or whatever she calls it. So very, very happy with that. So buy Blue Stars and make me happy. Get those numbers up.
And Do Not Weep for Me.
Yes.
And Freight Train.
And Flight Training, yes.
Got all those already.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time. Thank you.